Welcome back to the Contrarians. Today we have a Patreon voted for topic. This is a topic that would start off at Donnybrook in any pub in Sydney. Today we are looking at Tui New Lager versus Newcastle Brown Ale. We're looking at Bon Scott versus Brian Johnson. We are fighting out Highway to Hell versus Back in Black. One of those is the 100-pound gorilla in the room. It's the biggest selling hard rock album of all time. But this is the Contrarians, so I have a feeling I know which way this is going to go. We're going to kick it off tonight with Gary. Gary, tell us which one of those is your favorite and why.
The clear winner, 1979, Highway to Hell. But Back in Black was what got me into them, but I mean, come on. The variety on Highway to Hell.
Little closer on the mic, please.
Highway to Hell's got better variety. You know, the bluesiness of Nightcrawler, the scarier songs, the faster solos, Walk All Over You. I think it sounds better. The backing vocals are one of my favorite parts of the album. Beating Around the Bush is probably my favorite riff, maybe of their entire career. If You Want Blood, You Got It. And what else do I have here? It's got more of a fun side on the other end. You know, Get It Hot, Girls Got Rhythm, Love Hungry Man, classic album.
Sorry, I muted myself there. Okay, so we have one clear vote for Highway to Hell. All right, Kevin, which one is your favorite, sir?
Well, we're really splitting hairs here, but I have to agree. Highway to Hell is my favorite. I think I was introduced to both these albums by my older brother, and I think Back in Black was the first one. And then I think actually, now that I think about it, he had a copy of High Voltage, and I got really into that. And I was confused, like why they had different singers. I didn't know when I was young that Bon Scott was the original singer. And then I went back into the Bon years, and I've always had more of an appreciation of the rawness of the Bon years. Now, Highway to Hell is a little probably obviously the slickest of those, but to me, where Back in Black is the sort of arena rock album. Highway to Hell, they're sort of at the gates. They're not quite in the arena yet, and it's sort of the perfect transition album in between the two eras. I do like it. I do feel it's a little more up tempo on a lot of the parts than Back in Black. But I feel like Back in Black sort of tails off towards the end of the album. I'm not a huge fan of You Shook Me All Night Long. I've heard that too many times. And I think it's just sort of almost written to be a hit. Shake a Leg and Rock and Roll Noise Pollution is also that kind of arena sing-along song that I don't really care for. I rather have the sing-along of Highway to Hell. It's got more of a rawness and a funness to it versus like I said, I feel like Back in Black, some of it they were trying to write some hits, and that's understandable. Losing a singer like Bon Scott, they probably really felt like their backs were up against the wall and they had to do whatever they could, and I'm sure Mutt Lange ushered them along in that direction. But like I said, we are really splitting hairs here. But for me, it's Highway to Hell. My favorite tracks are Walk All Over You, Touch Too Much, Love Hungry Man. I could name it most of the album, but Girls Got Rhythm's also a great one. And it's just it still retains a little bit of that rawness that you had from Let There Be Rock and Power Age. Whereas you tend to lose that a little bit in Back in Black. It's almost a little too perfect. Not to say that's a bad album by any means, but I just prefer Highway to Hell just for all those reasons.
Okay. And unsurprising, 2 votes for Highway to Hell so far. Parrish, this was your topic. Tell us why Highway to Hell is the better album.
Well, it was my topic, and the reason I put it forward was to celebrate the fact that AC/DC are back on tour. Certainly over here in Europe, I'm sure they will announce the States and elsewhere afterwards. And I've got tickets in July to see them at Wembley, so I'm really excited about that. So I put the topic forward, I guess, in light of my excitement about seeing them. And I thought these 2 albums, because I thought it was a bit like Muhammad Ali up against Mike Tyson, sort of two big heavyweights of the ring, and it's very close to call. But I have gone on record before to say that on the Contrarians that Highway to Hell is my favourite album of all time. So from that point of view, it's no surprise. However, I did want to approach this a little bit more objectively rather than subjectively. So I set out some criteria to look at so that I could try to look at it subjectively. So the first thing I looked at was the covers. Which cover do I prefer? And I prefer Highway to Hell. I think Back in Black is iconic, and with the embossed logo looks really cool. And I thought it looked cool at the time when it came out. But I definitely think Highway to Hell's cover looks better. You can see the humour in there. So that was the first thing. The second was the production. And despite the fact that they're both produced by Mutt Lange, I think they are actually very different, the productions. Quite often you see a producer produce 2 or 3 albums, and you'd say that you can sort of feel a theme across them in the production. But I don't think that's the case in these. And I have to say, on this one, Back in Black gets it for me. I think the production on Back in Black is actually better than Highway to Hell. So I then thought I'd look at the band. Well, that wasn't quite so straightforward because 4 out of 5 are the same people. So Malcolm and Angus and Cliff and Phil, the same players. So it really came down to which do I prefer, Bon Scott or Brian Johnson. And as much as I like Brian, this was no contest. This was a Bon Scott. So I thought sales. Let's have a look at the sales. Back in Black isn't just the biggest selling rock album of all time. It's the 2nd biggest selling album of all time. And in comparison, Highway to Hell, if you look at Wikipedia, sold about 10 million worldwide, and Back in Black sold 30 million worldwide. So if I looked at it on album sales, it goes to Back in Black. So I thought I'd look at the current tour. Which album do they play the most songs from? So unlike AC/DC in the past, it's a pretty consistent set on this tour. They're not really mixing it about much. And from Highway to Hell, they're playing If You Want Blood, Shot Down in Flames, and Highway to Hell. And from Back in Black, they're playing Back in Black, Have a Drink on Me, Hell's Bells, You Shook Me All Night Long. So they're playing 4 songs off Back in Black as opposed to 3 off Highway to Hell. So the score goes to Back in Black, I think. So at this point, it's a tie, 2-2. So I then went in and scored the songs, scored each song on the albums out of 5, and the actual scoring there surprised me. But it came out 40 out of 50 for Highway to Hell and 39 out of 50 for Back in Black. So objectively, Back in Black lost by a point against Highway to Hell. So objectively, for me, Highway to Hell scored 42 and Back in Black scored 39. So very close. And if I went back to my boxing analogy, I'd say it's very similar to the end of Rocky 2, where Rocky Balboa beats Apollo Creed purely by the fact he gets back off the canvas within the count of 10 with a second to spare. So I think it is that close to call between the 2 albums, but it still goes to Highway to Hell.
Okay, that's 3-0. Now, I'm sure some of our more pedantic commenters are going to mention that those are very subjective ratings, no matter whether you have a criterion for them or not. But we're just going to let that go and move on to Rich. Rich, which is your more better album? And why is it
Well,
Highway to Hell?
I chose Highway to Hell. I remember the summer that Back in Black came out. There was a friend of mine that had a boombox, and I heard that album all summer long. And I don't know. I think Back in Black may be more consistent in terms of songs, but Highway to Hell, I think it is my favorite because. I mean, there's a few weak songs, but I think the strong songs on it are really, really good. And I think my favorite part of the album is Walk All Over You and Touch Too Much. I think those two songs definitely, they're almost like one song. I can't imagine one being played without the other. And I have a radio show, and when I play those, I always play those two songs. And I think that Highway to Hell has better variety. I think it has the better album cover. And I just like Bon Scott in general better than Brian Johnson. And I think there's some other good deep cuts on Highway to Hell, like Love Hungry Man and Nightcrawler. And I love the fact that Bon Scott's last words on record were Shazbot, Nanu Nanu, making reference to Mork and Mindy. So I thought that was really, really funny.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, and I also realized that I don't know the track order on Back in Black. I mean, I know what the order of the songs on Highway to Hell, but for Back in Black, I don't have the song order memorized. So to me, that's another reason why I like Highway to Hell better. And I just think Bon Scott had just a better overall personality than Brian Johnson, and probably the better voice. I think Brian Johnson was good on his first three albums, but after that, after Flick the Switch, he kind of went downhill a little bit. And I think Bon Scott was also the better writer of lyrics. So Highway to Hell gets it. That's definitely, it gets my vote.
Okay, well, this is turning into a one-sided slaughter, which I can't say I'm surprised by. So my role in the Contrarians is usually to be the contrarian of the Contrarians, but I can't this time because Highway to Hell is clearly the superior album. So I'm just going to be contrary to the 50 million people worldwide. It's usually estimated at 50, by the way, Parrish, worldwide. We'll say in the United States, Back in Black is only the fourth biggest selling rock album. Anyone know what number one is?
Thriller.
The Eagles' Greatest Hits is the highest selling rock album of all time in the U.S. So go figure. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So I will also be contrarian in that I am not an AC/DC fan. That is kind of surprising given the music that most people watching this channel or participating in the chats get into, but they're okay. They're not a top band for me. I like songs much more than I like albums, but if I'm going to listen to albums, the albums I listen to are Bon Scott albums. I think that Brian Johnson, his voice is screechy. I find the tempos on many of their songs a little frantic. They were much more laid back and in the pocket when they were recording with Bon. Bon had a sense of fun to his lyrics, even when he was being creepy and sexist. And Brian Johnson, I've always thought his lyrics were just kind of skeevy. They're misogynistic, which when I was 12, I maybe didn't pay much attention to that. But now I listen to some of it and go, man, I don't know, Brian. And I don't understand why the world loves Back in Black at the level that they do, because that is the album that everybody owns. Everybody I knew in high school, well, I was in junior high when that came out, but nonetheless, everybody I knew that liked music owned Back in Black. It didn't matter what they listened to. They could have been into the New Romantics and they had Back in Black. They could have been punk fans and had Back in Black. They could have loved the Cars and had Back in Black. Everybody had Back in Black. No matter what party you went to, somebody was going to put on Back in Black. You could not escape that album from the time it was released until now. It's been in freaking Marvel movies, 6 of them. That is a level of pop culture exposure that the Bon Scott years never were able to match. Although there are actually 2 Marvel movies that have Bon Scott songs, specifically Highway to Hell. But that's 2 to 6. Now, I did check their streaming numbers because I'm always fascinated by streaming numbers. On YouTube, the song Back in Black has 1.3 billion streams. And Highway to Hell has about half of that. 700, it only has 700 million streams. On Spotify, it's closer. Weirdly, it's still 1.3 billion for Back in Black. But it's just about 1 billion for Highway to Hell. So those songs are a lot closer than you might think in the wider public consciousness. But in terms of the albums, there's really no comparison for me. I never listened to Back in Black. And some of that has got to be attributed to the fact that I really have heard Shook Me All Night Long, Hell's Bells. Back in Black is a great track. I probably like it better than any of the other songs on that album. And I like Shoot to Thrill. But I have heard those songs so often. And you just don't get that level of overexposure with Highway to Hell. Plus, Bon, other than the fact that, he drank himself into an early grave, he seems like he might have been a fun guy to hang out with. Although, actually, I've seen Brian Johnson on old episodes of Top Gear, and he seemed like a pretty fun guy, too. So, don't want to cast any aspersions on the man. I've seen AC/DC live one time. I was way too young to see them when Bon was still alive. But I saw them on the Razor's Edge tour. And will say I'm still disappointed that they produced the one T-shirt that just fell apart in the wash. They had the slashes on it from the Razor's Edge album cover, and the whole thing just fell apart when I watched it. So AC/DC, you put out crap T-shirts, and you're still disappointing me all these years later. Hopefully they put out better ones when Parrish goes to see them in concert. All right, guys, we are just blowing right through this. So let's get into it. Pop culture exposure. Who thinks that Highway to Hell should have better pop culture exposure? Parrish, in the UK, are there more venues than just Marvel movies that are putting on AC/DC songs?
I would say no, not particularly. I would say that Back in Black is known more than Highway to Hell. But interestingly, I was at a pub quiz a couple of years ago, and one of the questions was to name the song based on the intro, and they played Highway to Hell as the intro. And then when he gave out the answer, he said it was Back in Black. And everybody in the pub, and it wasn't a rockers pub, everybody in the pub shouted at him, no, it's not Back in Black, it's Highway to Hell. So that would tell you it's fairly well, both songs are pretty well in the culture over here. But yeah, I think there's no doubt that Back in Black is still would be more highly recognised than Highway to Hell is. If generally as tracks, maybe not the 2 title tracks, but the rest of the albums, I think generally Back in Black would be more widely recognised.
Okay. I have to admit, again, I was very surprised that the Spotify streams were so close, because so many Spotify streams are driven by the algorithm, and Spotify tends to recommend songs that they have to pay less royalties for. I think AC/DC are very up to date on collecting their royalties, and they're notorious blockers of YouTube videos if you do their songs or something on YouTube. Although I noticed there were a lot of people that had posted the Back in Black album, so maybe that's no longer a thing. All right, anybody want to take a stab at just other general Bon Scott versus Brian Johnsonisms? Anything's on the table now, not just those 2 albums. Bon versus Brian, what do you think?
I think Bon Scott had the more fun personality. I think Brian Johnson seems more like kind of like a guy you just kind of hang out with at the pub, he seems like a really nice guy. And but Bon Scott to me was much more of a character. Had a very cool sense of humor about him. Yeah, I don't know. I just think between the two of them, I remember for the longest time thinking that Bon Scott didn't look like he'd be the singer for AC/DC. I thought that Angus Young looked more like he'd be the singer for AC/DC with that, with that voice. But anyhow, so that's my thoughts on two of them. And I think Bon Scott was a better singer for longer than Brian Johnson. But if Bon Scott had, lived past 1980, maybe his voice would have started suffering too. I don't know, but I think he was a better lyric writer and just the better the more fun personality.
All right, Gary.
And it's interesting too, the landscapes that they were in the band at the time. Brian came in right on the right on the cusp, right when they. Because no matter what, that sixth album, if Bon would have survived past 1980 and they released Back in Black, it would have still been huge. They were just building momentum until that album came out when Brian happened to come in. I wonder how that would have, what if Brian would have started in the band? How would that have affected each of their personalities, or had Bon lived on,
Okay, fair points. Kevin?
Yeah, I was going to say, given the timing of Bon's death, and when Back in Black came out, I find it very hard to believe that Bon didn't have a big part to play in Back in Black. I think his lyrics are all over this album. You look at a song like, you were talking about some of his lyrics before that can get kind of on the raunchy side. What do you do for money, honey? Giving the dog a bone. Let me put my love into you. Those almost seem like amped up Bon lyrics. Now, maybe they had a demo version of it and then it wasn't completed, and maybe they amped it up a little bit with some of the lyrics. Maybe they took them directly. They were unedited. I've read some things where, there was at times internal friction between Bon and especially Malcolm. I think it had to do sort of with Bon sort of being a loose cannon. They couldn't control him. But at times when he would present lyrics, it's reported that, hey, you need to tone it back a little bit. This is a little too much. So I can see some of that, parts of that in Back in Black. And I don't care what the album credits say. I think Bon had a big part to play in this album. Just given the timing of his death and how quick this album came out afterwards, it would be a miracle if they didn't have a lot of these songs already written and rehearsed by the time they went in the studio. All that said, I mean, I think the only thing I would add to that is, in more proof is, AC/DC never really reached these heights again after Back in Black. You look at the next two albums, For Those About the Rock and Flick of the Switch, they really took a noticeable downturn from Back in Black. And, it's understandable given the success of, you're never going to reach Back in Black, but I think lyric-wise, songwriting-wise, it really took a downturn. And so I think Bon had a big part to play in Back in Black, no matter what people say.
Well, there's a lot of internet conspiracy theories about that. Brian Johnson will meet you in the parking lot after the show. I know that I personally like Flick of the Switch better than Back in Black. I know that's also not a popular opinion. The Contrarians have a video on that, by the way. You can search for it down below. I also find it fascinating that AC/DC is one of the few bands to make it into the Diamond Sellers Club that was not really an MTV era band. Now, MTV didn't start until 82, 83. Back in Black comes out in 1980. And now they did do videos. They did videos for 4 songs, and they probably played those in whatever venues were available in the UK and Europe, but there was no video show in the United States, really. So the other thing to remember, of course, though, is AC/DC, they ain't the most photogenic dudes in the world. So they didn't really have that kind of, chick magnet appeal that you would get with the hair bands later. And I know now we make fun of them, but at the time, those guys were considered to be pretty desirable by those that are into such things. AC/DC, You've got Angus in his schoolboy uniform. You've got Brian with his little, what is that, a golfer hat, a caddy hat? I don't even know what that is he wears.
Flat cap.
A flat cap.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a north of England hat called a flat cap.
All right. I have to take your word for that. But the fact that they were able, again, to sell so many albums. Now, if you look at the data, they were actually certified for 10 million sales before SoundScan. I talk about SoundScan all the time. What that means is those numbers were just made up by somebody and they have no factual basis in reality. Whereas in the SoundScan era, they're based, even though there are still some estimates, they're based on actual sales, point of sale systems. And they sold 15 million copies after 1991. So that album has never not been popular. And again, I don't understand the enduring legacy of it. I think AC/DC's got better music. I don't know why people love that album, but they do love it. They continue to buy it. Surely somebody has to think that Back in Black is the better album because 50 million people bought it worldwide. And that's, more than 5 times the lifetime sales of Highway to Hell. And frankly, Highway to Hell would not have sold a fraction of what it did without Back in Black's popularity. Back in Black pulled up Highway to Hell. It pulled up For Those About to Rock. As Martin Popoff is fond of saying, AC/DC are functionally still touring Back in Black. No matter what album they come out with, they're on the Back in Black tour until they just decide to retire.
Isn't Razor's Edge kind of close, trailing behind Highway to Hell in sales?
In sales,
third, right?
I did not look before this show, but I was thinking it was more in the 2 to 3 million range.
I think it's 4 or 5 million. It's the third biggest album of
okay.
that, yeah. And then after that, it's I think it's then for Those About to Rock is then is sort of fourth. So I don't think it's quite as much as Highway to Hell. But then I was looking on Wikipedia, and as you have corrected me earlier, Reed, so what do I know? But it didn't look as if. I think Highway to Hell was about 10, and The Razor's Edge was about 7.
Yeah,
which is
so still
Thunderstruck, really, because that's a.
Yes, and Listen to the Money. What was the name of that song?
Money Talk.
Money Talk,
of course.
I hate that song.
Well, that I would say that was a bizarre late career resurgence for AC/DC. I saw that tour. That was the tour they put out AC/DC Live on. Very popular. King's X opened. Frankly, King's X was the better band. We can do a show on that some other time. All right. I've said my piece. Anybody want to add some last minutes before we wrap up?
I've got a few maybe contrarian points to make.
Okay.
If I was looking at this objectively, I think Highway to Hell is my favourite album, but I think Back in Black is the better album.
Ooh.
So somebody, it's not always the case that the album you like best is always the best album or the better album. So I think there's a difference there. I don't think AC/DC would have had the same appeal long term if Bond had lived. I think Bond's appeal was very much to the hard rock and the rock fraternity. And I think that AC/DC did step over to a more commercial market and to a wider appeal, which I'm not convinced would have happened with Bon Scott. And one of the reasons for that is I was lucky enough to see them live with Bon Scott on the Highway to Hell tour. And he was certainly equal to Angus Young on stage. I would say that they were kind of both very strong. But Brian Johnson always seemed to take a step back to allow Angus Young to become the frontman. And I think part of AC/DC's appeal is Angus Young. I think it is that schoolboy image, what he does on stage. And I'm not sure that would have been quite so powerful if Bon Scott had still been about. I think there would have still have been a little bit of that vying for who was going to be the star of the band. And I think, therefore, that it may not have lasted, or the appeal wouldn't have been there. I definitely don't think the band would have survived as long as it has. I think they would have split up. They may have reformed again, but I think they would have split up. I think the egos, I mean, somebody said it earlier that there was tension there, and I think there definitely was. I don't think that same tension was there with anger with the young brothers and with Brian Johnson. So I think they survived, all these years because Brian was a much easier guy to get on with and was happy. I think he recognised it was their band and he was just singing as opposed to feeling that it was his band as much. And I don't think that, personally, I don't think Bon Scott had much to do with Back in Black. I think Back in Black sounds to me like a concert album. A lot of the songs are very much written around Bon Scott's death. And then those that aren't, I just think lack the humour. I can't believe that those songs were written by Bon Scott, because I think Bon Scott had a lot more humour, and his use of the double entendre was much cleverer. And I just don't think it exists on Back in Black. So I think they would have been cleverer lyrics if Bon Scott had been involved in them. So that's my view on it. So yeah, a few contrarian views maybe.
I will say Brian Johnson is the most uncomfortable looking singer I have ever watched perform. The way he hunches his shoulders up and screams into the microphone. Yeah. That's what every singing teacher in the world tells you not to do. But which one of them has sold 50 million albums?
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Last points before we wrap her up tonight?
Well, I just wanted to say that one aspect that I think gets overlooked sometimes in AC/DC are the backing vocals.
Yes.
Like, I really love their backing vocals, especially on a few songs on Highway to Hell, like Walk All Over You and Touch Too Much. And there was another song I was thinking of for the Brian Johnson era, the song Rock and Roll Train. I love the backing vocals for that. It was almost like having like another singer in the band. So I always thought the backing vocals were kind of fun.
Dirty Deeds too.
Yeah, yep.
Right. Again, an album only published in the United States because Back in Black was so successful. Kevin, any last thoughts?
One thing that just popped into my head was, you always hear people that complain about AC/DC saying all their songs sound the same or all their albums sound the same. I don't think that's true, but I could see that point from Back in Black forward. And to your point earlier, Reed, where Martin says they're touring that album constantly. It seems like the sound of the album and the structure of the songs and the type of songs are very much Back in Black from 1980 on. When you look back at Let There Be Rock and Power Age and Highway to Hell, there's a lot more variety there than I think people give it credit for. But that sort of stops with Back in Black.
Okay. All right. I'm going to leave it there. Well, guys, thank you very much for participating in this evening's panel. It's a 5-0 victory for Highway to Hell. Again, I fully expected that, but thank you for fulfilling my expectations. And anybody watching this video, thank you very much for watching it. Check out our other content. We put up lots of free videos. Hopefully you find them entertaining. Otherwise, I can't imagine why you clicked on this in the first place. Check out the Patreon, all that good kind of stuff. And we will see you very soon on another Contrarians video.
All right.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.